It is 7:30 a.m. in Orlando. The Florida sun is beginning to bake the asphalt of the mosaic at Millennia condominiums. Inside Unit 2226, a pot of coffee sits cold. A shower is still damp. But the woman who lived here is gone. No signs of a struggle. No forced entry. Just a set of tire tracks and a haunting piece of grainy surveillance footage that shows a figure walking past a fence, their face perfectly hidden by the iron bars in every single frame. It was a one-in-a-million stroke of luck for a predator, and a nightmare for a family that would last decades. But what the police didn't realize at that moment was that the person behind the wheel of Jennifer's car was watching them. What happened to Jennifer Kesse that morning? And why, after 20 years, is the only lead a ghost on a camera? Tonight, we're going inside 10 of Florida's most disturbing cold cases. Cases that were buried. Cases that were ignored. Cases that haunt the families who lived them. Stay with us because case number 10 will leave you speechless. Welcome to Crime Archives TV, where America's forgotten cold cases finally get the attention they deserve. If you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications. A new case drops every week. Now, let's go back to Florida. Case: Jennifer Kesse. Jennifer Kesse was a high achiever who had her entire life mapped out. She was a financial analyst, a graduate of the University of Central Florida, and had recently purchased her own condo. Her friends described her as the reliable one, the person who never missed a call and always checked in. She loved her family, her boyfriend, and her career. On the weekend of the 21st of January 2006, she had just returned from a brief vacation in St. Croix. She was happy, she was safe. Nothing in Jennifer's life suggested what was coming. Until Tuesday, January 24th. The humidity was already rising on that Tuesday morning. At 6 p.m. on Monday night, Jennifer spoke to her parents. Everything was normal. At 10 p.m., she spoke to her boyfriend. They said their "I love yous." At 7:30 a.m. Tuesday, Jennifer's phone pings a tower near her condo. She is getting ready for work. She steps into the shower. She picks out her clothes. Then, silence. When Jennifer didn't show up for a management meeting at 11 a.m., her office called her parents. Her father knew instantly something was wrong. By the time her family arrived at her condo, her car was gone. But inside, her mail was on the table. Her pajamas were on the floor. Her morning coffee was untouched. It was as if she had been snatched out of time. That was the last time anyone saw Jennifer Kesse alive. 2 days later, a tip led police to the Huntington on the Green apartment complex, just a mile away. There, they found Jennifer's black Chevy Malibu. The investigation turned to the surveillance cameras. They saw a figure park the car, walk away, and never look back. But the person of interest was obscured by a gate. The height of the fence matched the height of the person's head in every frame. Detectives pulled 6 months of phone records. They interviewed construction workers at her complex. Residents had complained about workers harassing women in the halls. One worker had even been seen in Jennifer's building when he shouldn't have been. Yet, no DNA was found in the car. No fingerprints on the door. It was a professional disappearance in broad daylight. But here is where the case takes a turn that nobody saw coming. Years later, the Kesse family sued the Orlando Police Department to get the full case file. When they finally received the thousands of pages of documents, they discovered something the public never knew. Police had found a latent print on the steering wheel that didn't belong to Jennifer. But even more shocking, a witness at the apartment complex where the car was found reported seeing a man walking away from the Malibu, a man wearing a distinct worker's uniform. That man was never identified. The person on the video wasn't just a passerby. They were likely someone who had been watching Jennifer for days. Today, the Kesse family continues their own private investigation. They have spent over $1 million searching for their daughter. Jennifer's room in her parents' home remains exactly as it was. Do you think the person on that grainy video is still living in Orlando today? Leave your thoughts below. Case number 2. Susan Perkins was the heartbeat of her community in Altamonte Springs. At 31, she was known for her bravery and her fierce loyalty to her friends. On the 31st of August 2004, she was doing what she did best, helping a friend. They were at a local salon on Maitland Avenue, working late into the evening. tinting windows to get the business ready for the next day. Susan was the kind of person who didn't mind the hard work. She was focused on building a life for herself. Nothing suggested she wouldn't make it home that night. Until 8:30 p.m., a masked man entered the salon. He didn't want the equipment. He wanted Susan. At 8:45 p.m., he forced Susan and her friend into her own red Ford Focus. At 9 p.m., they were at a Washington Mutual Bank ATM. Under the threat of a rifle, Susan withdrew cash. At 9:10 p.m., the suspect made a chilling move. He ordered both women into the trunk of the car. As the vehicle sped away from the bank, Susan realized they weren't being let go. She found the emergency release handle. In a split second of incredible courage, she told her friend, "We have to go." Both women leapt from the moving vehicle. Susan's friend survived with minor injuries, but Susan struck her head on the pavement. The suspect didn't stop. He drove off into the night, abandoning the car blocks away. Detectives processed the red Focus for every fiber and fingerprint. They found a military-style jacket and noted a distinct smell of motor oil. But despite the DNA and the physical evidence, the trail hit a brick wall. The man in the mask vanished. What investigators discovered next would change the scope of the search. This wasn't a random robbery. The suspect had been watching the salon for days. Witnesses later came forward describing a man who didn't fit in, standing near the shadows of the building in the week leading up to the attack. He knew their schedule. He knew when they would be alone. And yet, despite being seen by multiple people, he has never been identified. Susan Perkins is remembered as a hero who gave her life so her friend could escape. Her case file sits on a desk in Altamonte Springs, waiting for a name to match the DNA found in that red Ford Focus. If you were in the Maitland Avenue area in August 2004, you might hold the missing piece. Case number 3. Noemi Custodio. Noemi was 24, a vibrant bank worker in Miami. She was a creature of habit who loved fashion and her family. She was the light of every room she walked into, always planning her next career move. On the 4th of August, 2003, Noemi left work at 5:05 p.m. She told a coworker she was heading home to change before a dinner date. Her car was found in her assigned parking spot the next morning. The doors were locked and her purse was sitting on the passenger seat. But Noemi had vanished without a trace. Bloodhounds picked up her scent at the car door, but it stopped abruptly right there. It was as if she had been lifted off the ground. Police eventually looked at the apartment maintenance staff and found that one man had quit and vanished the very next day. What investigators discovered next would change everything. In his abandoned locker, police found a notebook. It contained hand-drawn maps of the complex with specific windows circled in red. Noemi's window was marked with the time, 5:20 p.m. He hadn't just targeted her. He had been studying her life minute by minute. The man remains a fugitive, believed to be hiding in Central America. Do you believe this was a crime of obsession, or is there a detail we are still missing? Case number 4. Lila Leach. Lila was 82, independent, and loved her garden in East Milton. She spoke to her daughter every single day and was the pillar of her neighborhood. Even at 82, she was the first to offer a home-cooked meal to a neighbor in need. On the 16th of June 2010, Lila spoke to her daughter at 9 p.m. and said she was heading to bed. When morning came, her daughter arrived to find the front door unlocked. The TV was still humming. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the table. Her dentures were in a glass and her walker was right by her chair. But Lila was gone. Search teams combed the surrounding woods for weeks but found nothing. There were no signs of a struggle or a break-in. However, a neighbor later reported seeing a dark SUV idling in her driveway at 3 a.m. that night with its lights off. It sat there for 10 minutes before disappearing into the night. Years later, financial records showed Lila had withdrawn $5,000 in cash just before vanishing. One of those specific bills turned up 50 miles away, spent by a family acquaintance. Unfortunately, that man passed away before police could question him. Her remains have never been found, leaving a hole in the heart of her community. Someone knows where Lila is. Case number 5. Wende Ellinger. Wende was 37, a devoted mother in Fort Myers, who was known for her fierce protective nature over her children. She worked hard, lived quietly, and put her family above all else. On the 5th of July, 2005, Wende was seen talking to a man in a white van in her front yard at 1:30 p.m. At 2 p.m., her children came home to find the front door wide open and a pot of water boiling over on the stove. Wende was gone. Police found Wende's car at the home, but the driver's seat was pushed all the way back too far for the petite Wende to reach the pedals. Someone else had clearly driven the vehicle and returned it to the driveway. 10 years later, a breakthrough occurred when her house keys were found buried in a small metal box in the woods. Inside the box was also a photo of Wende, taken through her window weeks before she disappeared. It was proof that she had been stalked by someone who knew her every move. If you are watching from Fort Myers, you may know something about who was watching Wende that summer. Justice is long overdue for her children. Case number 6. Alfred Mauvais. Alfred Mauvais was the heartbeat of his neighborhood in Boynton Beach. At 58 years old, he was known for his steady hands and his love for a good game of cards. He was the kind of man who always had a smile for his neighbors and a story to tell. Nothing in Alfred's life suggested what was coming, until the night of the 8th of February 2007. It's a humid Florida evening. Alfred walks to a friend's house on NE 4th Avenue, looking forward to a night of cards and conversation. At 11:30 p.m., the atmosphere is light. But suddenly, the front door is kicked open. Armed men flood the room. They aren't wearing masks. They are shouting in Creole. Alfred sees an opening and bolts for the door, and then silence. Police arrive to find Alfred outside the home. The robbers had vanished into the Florida night. Detectives interviewed every person at that card table. They checked local gang ties and looked into recent robberies in the Haitian American community. They found one consistent detail. The shooters didn't seem worried about being seen. But here is where the case takes a turn that nobody saw coming. Despite multiple witnesses seeing the shooters' faces clearly, every single person in that room claimed they couldn't identify them. A wall of silence fell over the neighborhood. Fear of retaliation had turned a room full of friends into a room full of strangers. Alfred's case sits in the Boynton Beach cold case files. His family still searches for someone brave enough to speak his name to a detective. Do you think fear is what keeps this killer free? Leave your thoughts below. Case number 7. James Edward Tuff Jr. James was a respected figure in Gainesville, known for his quiet nature and his dedication to his work. At 45, he had built a stable life and was the person his neighbors turned to when they needed a helping hand. In 2006, the air was still and heavy in Gainesville. James was at his home, relaxing after a long shift. He stepped out onto his porch to catch a breeze, still wearing his work boots. He never made it back inside. When his sister came by the next morning, the front door was slightly ajar. James's dinner was still on the table, and his favorite hat was resting on the porch railing. But James had vanished. Investigators found signs of a violent encounter near the bushes at the edge of the yard. There were scuff marks in the dirt, suggesting someone had been forced into a vehicle. Detectives interviewed everyone in the vicinity, but James had no enemies. He was a man of peace. But what investigators discovered next would change everything. A jailhouse witness eventually came forward, claiming that a local crew had been hired to send a message to a man with a similar name who lived just 2 streets over. James Edward Tuff Jr. had been the victim of a tragic case of mistaken identity. James's family continues to push for a search of the rural areas outside of town. If you were in Gainesville in 2006 and saw a white pickup truck idling near 4th Street, your memory could be the final piece. Case number 8. Michael Crutchfield. Michael was a 21-year-old in Gainesville, with his whole life ahead of him. In 1999, he was working hard and spending his free time with a close-knit group of friends. He was known for being the peacemaker of the group. On a Friday night in August, Michael attended a small gathering at an apartment complex. At 2 a.m., he told his friends he was tired and headed toward his car in the parking lot. He waved goodbye, his keys jingling in his hand, and then silence. When he didn't show up for work the next morning, his mother knew something was terribly wrong. His vehicle was found 3 weeks later, abandoned in a remote field in a neighboring county. The car had been meticulously cleaned. There were no fingerprints, no stray hairs, and the floor mats had been removed. It was as if the car had been detailed by a professional to remove every trace of Michael. But here is where the case takes a turn that nobody saw coming. A review of payphone records near the abandoned car showed a call made just hours after Michael vanished. That call was traced to a residence that was under surveillance by federal agents for a major investigation. Michael had no ties to that world, but police suspect he may have accidentally witnessed a transaction in that parking lot, a moment of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Michael's mother still keeps his high school jersey hanging in his room, waiting for the day he walks through the door. Case number 9. In 1990, the salt air of Cocoa, Florida, usually signaled vacation and relaxation. For 41-year-old Christine Cecelic, it was just home. Christine was a woman who moved through life with a quiet, steady rhythm. She was known by her neighbors as someone who kept to herself but always had a kind word for the local shopkeepers. She loved the Florida sun and spent her mornings sipping coffee on her porch, watching the humidity rise off the pavement. She was a daughter, a friend, and a woman who finally felt she had found her footing in Brevard County. Nothing in Christine's life suggested what was coming, until the 11th of March 1990. The morning of March 11 was typical for a Florida spring, warm and bright. At 10:15 a.m., Christine was seen at a local convenience store, buying a few basic items. She looked relaxed, wearing a casual outfit suited for the heat. She exchanged a quick joke with the clerk, grabbed her bag, and walked out into the shimmering parking lot. That was the last time anyone saw her smile. By 4 p.m., a friend tried to call her, but the line just rang. By 8 p.m., the silence in Christine's apartment was deafening. The television was off. The coffee pot was cold. Somewhere between that convenience store and her front door, the world had swallowed Christine Cecelic whole. And then, silence. The search didn't begin in earnest until Christine failed to show up for a scheduled meeting the following day. When detectives finally arrived at her home, they found no signs of a struggle. Her car was parked in its usual spot. Her keys were on the counter. It was as if she had stepped out for a moment and simply never stepped back in. Days later, the investigation took a grim turn. A maintenance worker clearing brush near a canal along I-95 spotted something in the water. It was Christine. Detectives pulled 6 months of her phone records and conducted dozens of interviews, but the leads were frustratingly thin. They found one forensic detail, a set of tire tracks near the canal bank that didn't match Christine's car. Someone had driven her to that water, someone she likely knew. But here is where the case takes a turn that nobody saw coming. For years, the case was treated as a random act of violence. But in 2012, a cold case detective re-examining the original witness statements found a glaring inconsistency. A man who had claimed to be a witness to Christine walking home that day had actually been under investigation for a similar disappearance in a neighboring county. The shock? This man had been a frequent visitor to Christine's apartment complex. He wasn't a stranger. He was a familiar face in her daily routine. Even more disturbing, his vehicle at the time matched the dimensions of the tire tracks found at the canal. But by the time police realized the connection, the man had passed away, taking the location of the primary evidence with him. Today, Christine Cecelic's case remains officially unsolved. Her family in Brevard County still passes that canal on I-95, haunted by the knowledge that the person who did this lived among them for years. There is no closure, only a cold file and a name that refuses to be forgotten. Do you think the witness was the true culprit? Or is there another predator from the 1990s still walking the streets of Cocoa? Leave your thoughts below. Case number 10, Shirley Badger Trenner. Shirley was an ambitious, old entrepreneur in 1985. She was the proud owner of a new computer store in Palm Harbor, a dream she had worked years to achieve. On a late night in June, Shirley was finishing up the monthly inventory. She called her husband at 11 p.m., sounding tired but satisfied. She told him she was locking the doors and would be home in 20 minutes. She never arrived. When police entered the store, they found a scene that defied logic. The store was perfectly tidy. The cash register was full of money. Shirley's purse was sitting on the counter, and her car keys were right next to it. It was a locked room mystery in real life. But what investigators discovered next would change everything. The open sign on the front door had been flipped to "closed" from the inside. However, The back door was found slightly unlatched. Leading from that back door were a single set of muddy footprints. The mud was fresh, but there had been no rain in Palm Harbor for 3 days. Forensic testing later revealed the mud contained traces of salt and specific biological markers found only in the deep mangroves of the nearby coast. Shirley's disappearance remains one of the most haunting mysteries in the proof. History of Florida. Someone came from the water, and someone took Shirley. 10 cases. 10 families still waiting for answers. These are not just stories. These are real people, real families, real pain that never goes away. If any of these cases affected you, tell us in the comments. Which case shocked you the most? Which one do you think will finally be solved? And if you want more, we cover a new U.S. state twice in a week. Florida was just the beginning. Subscribe, hit the bell, because the next case might be from your state, and it might change everything. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and never stop asking questions. This is Crime Archives TV. Good night.